Welcome to part 4 of this Introduction to Flash Game Development from Indie Game Development. Today we're going to work on projectiles. In the previous tutorials we worked on using the mouse and the keyboard to point and orientate a turret on the screen and to move it around the screen. Let's bring that up now so we can see where we were. We worked on being able to angle the turret to the mouse, to be able to use the mouse to fire, and to be able to click on the turret and move it around the field. But obviously now we've got the ability to fire, we need to be able to introduce projectiles. Okay, so first thing we're going to need to do is draw a projectile. So I'm going to create a new symbol called projectile. As always, as we've done before, we export that for ActionScript and click OK. Okay. So, as we have with the main movie clip, we have code which handles the main movie clip. We can also have code that will sit behind the projectile. Now, today we're just going to use this for holding some properties, so we don't have to define them elsewhere. It's just a neater way of doing things, is putting your properties in a class underneath your movie clip. So, if I open that projectile movie clip, you can see here it's automatically put a class in of projectile. So I click on the button that creates it. What I've already done is I've already put in these two properties. We're not putting anything in our constructor this time. I've got a friend property, which is a boolean, true or false, and a velocity, which is a number. The angle is already handled by the movie clip function anyway, so all we need to do is add the extra bits which we need for the projectile. The velocity will be the speed at which the projectile will be travelling. Okay, so we've got our projectile class now. We've been through classes before, fairly straightforward. They just have a similar name, whatever you decide to give to the movie clip. It extends the movie clip, which basically means it extends the ability for you to do other things. Like I say, we have the properties and the constructor. The constructor is not used at this time, but it might be later on if we need to. As we can see here, it imports the movie clip functionality from Flash. Okay, so now we know we have these properties in here. We can close this down. And in our mainframe, we need some way of tracking all the projectiles that we're going to be firing around the screen. So we use an array being a collection of objects. So in the top, where I put all my other properties, I'm going to put a new array called projectiles. Okay. And as we've done before, inside the game loop, we have an initialization section. We went through this in the previous tutorials, and it sets up all of our listeners and any objects we want on the screen before we actually start the main game. At the bottom of this, I'm going to tell the projectiles object to be a new array, a blank array. Now, later on we'll have to handle this. If we want to start the game again, we have to somehow clear out the projectiles we're already using. But for now, we're not going to worry about that. Okay. So the next thing I need to introduce you to is the function that we're going to use primarily for moving around these projectiles. Now, I've written it already for you. It's again another maths function. You can download it on the website. All of this code will be available on the website. Last time we introduced you to angle to object. This allowed us to point the turret in the right direction. This time we're introducing you to project object. This takes a object, an angle, and a distance. The distance being the velocity, how far we want it to travel. the angle being obviously which direction we want to point it in, and the source object being the projectile itself. Inside here, the main thing you need to know, it uses the math.cos and math.sin functions, that's sine and cosine, and they use radians to be able to figure out how far to project the object. I won't go into how this works, it's standard mathematics. As I said, you can download it from our website, or you can just copy it from the screen before you if you're in HD. I'll leave it there for a couple of seconds so you can pause the video if you want to be able to copy that code. But essentially we're going to use this function to move our projectiles around the screen. Now, the thing we want to do today is just how to manage objects on the screen. So what we actually need to do is we need to somehow say how we want to fire the projectile. So we're going to create a new function called fire projectile. We're going to do this down here below the project object function, just so we can see the relationship. Okay, so let's create a new function, fire projectile. Parameters we're going to accept are friend, which is a true or false. Is it a friendly projectile? And where did it come from? So the source object, who fired it. Okay. Now, because we created a class here that we use to manage the projectile, we put some properties within inside of it. That object should now appear on the list for us to use. So if I say var new projectile, which is the type of projectile, you'll see it down at the bottom of that list for us to select. We're going to make that a new projectile. So effectively we create a blank projectile that we can put onto the screen. What we need to do now is say the new projectile's horizontal position, the X position, is the same as the source object's position. So we know it was fired by the source object. Let's make sure it's positioned in the same place. Doing the same with the vertical position there. Now we need to make sure that it's firing in the same direction that we're pointing. So we say the rotation of the projectile is the same as the source object's rotation. Now here we put two parameters called friend and velocity into the projectile, so we need to make sure those are filled in. So we say new projectile dot friend is equal to this parameter which we're passing in called friend, and the new projectile dot velocity is equal to, now I'm going to put in an arbitrary number here, I'm just going to put 10 for now because you could pass it in, but it's going to be really based on what kind of enemy you're going to have. And we're not dealing with enemies until the next tutorial, so I'm just going to put 10 in there for now. We then need to say stage dot add child new projectile. But the other thing we have to do is we have to manage this projectile somehow. We need to know how many projectiles there are on screen, how we're going to loop through them, how we're going to deal with them. So we're actually going to add it to that array that we created. We do that by pushing it into the array. Imagine a big stack of dishes. We're going to push it into the array. We're going to push the next dish onto the top. So okay. Now the one thing we didn't do before, we created a class for this projectile, but we didn't actually put any graphics in. It's quite important, otherwise you won't see it on the screen. So, it's going to be really simple here. I'm just going to put a little block in, nothing fancy, and I'm going to center it on the screen. Now, this is the bit which we have to be careful about how we create our projectile. We've got to consider where it's going to hit something. And the chances are it's going to hit something at the nose end first. So what we want to do is actually lower this down So this little cross we've got at the top here is at the top, and the rest of the projectile that's behind it is the bit that's going to be following. So when we hit test something, i.e. is it hitting something, it's very efficient just to test the front parts, because it's a long thin projectile. Something hits at the front, you're pretty much sure it's going to hit. You will later on, as you get more advanced, do lots of hit points all the way down the projectile, so that you'll check the whole length of the projectile. But for simplicity's sake, we're going to go with just testing the front in the next tutorial. So that's why I put it in that position. Okay, so the projectile's got a graphic now. We've got a little class behind it which has some properties in, which allows us to manage it. We've got a function called fireProjectile and an array which allows us to hold those projectiles. But what we need to do now is we need to somehow actually fire it. Now, if I start this up, we talked about before, if I hold my mouse button down on the actual turret, I want to be able to move it round. I don't want to be firing anything whilst I'm moving it. Once I've stopped, let go and press somewhere else, you can see here it's not moving the turret, so we should be able to fire at that point. Now this is all based on what we've already done in the previous tutorials. We said here, if the mouse is down and the ball is clicked, then allow it to be moved. So if the ball is clicked, it's crucial. We know we want to be able to fire a projectile if the ball isn't clicked. So this is where we decide to put the rest of the code in. When the mouse is pushed down, we want to fire the projectile. So if the ball is not clicked, that's when we want to fire a projectile. I've done that on the mouse down. The reason why I've done that on the mouse down simply because is on the mouse up, we tell is ball clicked equals false. That means we'll never be able to check that parameter. But don't worry, it should work. So mouse down, is ball clicked, let's fire a projectile. So fire projectile. Is it a friend? Well, yes it is, it's ours. The source object will be the ball object, the turret. I think for the next tutorial we might rename that to turret object, but for now that's good. Okay, so what we should now find is when we click a button away from the mouse, we have a collection of projectiles stacked in the middle of the screen. When I've moved it, and I click again, there we go. Now, there's something wrong with this picture. I'm firing a projectile and it's appearing at the back of my turret. That's not right. What we really want to do is for it to appear at the end of the barrel. Okay, so how do we deal with that? In the fireProjectile function, let's put something in here. If it's a friend, I know how big this movie clip is going to be. I know where the end of the turret is going to be. So what I want to do is I want to tell the projectile to move towards the end of the barrel. And we do that by using this function which I mentioned before called PROJECTObject. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to project the object, this new projectile, the source object, off at an angle. Now we've already given that projectile an angle, haven't we? So let's use that. And how far do we want to project it? Well, we want to make it near the end of the barrel, so let's just say 60 pixels. Let's try that again. Fire. Oh, good. It's at the end of the barrel now. All we did was we told it to move a projectile from the centre of this gun towards the way that the turret is pointing by 60 pixels. It's appeared at the end of the turret. But nothing's moving. We've got a projectile, but it's not actually moving anywhere. What we needed to do is actually fire off in a direction. So we need a way of managing these projectiles. Now I'm going to revisit something we did at the first tutorial. In the first tutorial we said in the game loop we check and see if this game has been initialized. If it hasn't, set up the game. If it has, this is where we put all the game action. And as you can see in here, this is the part of code we put in tutorial 2 or 3, I can't remember which now, which allowed us to move the actual turret around the screen. So actually under here, we want to put some code in that will also manage the projectiles to make them keep moving, if you will. What we're going to do is put a loop in which moves from the end of the array, the projectiles array, back to the beginning. And I'll explain why we do it in reverse in a second. So we're going to say for projectile ID, which is a number, is equal to projectiles.length. Okay, so we're starting a new counter, which is going to start at the end of the projectile array. We say -1. There's a reason for that. Everything goes from the length -1 to 0. It's a programming thing. It's the way it's done. It just saves space in memory. Don't worry about it. It's just the way it works. So it's the length of the array -1. We then say the projectile ID must be greater or equal to 0 because we don't want to go beyond the beginning of the array. And the projectile ID moves backwards. So we start off at say 14 projectile, then we move to 13 projectile, projectile 12, projectile 11, till we get to projectile 0, and then we stop. Okay. So this little piece here is actually going to loop through all the projectiles that we have on the screen, which is very useful. And that's why we use the array in the first place, because now we have a reference to all the projectiles that we have on the screen. Okay, but now we need to actually grab that projectile. We want to do something with it, so we say var handle projectile is a projectile, but that is equal to the projectile in the array. So we're going to grab the projectile out of the array and we're going to do something with it. So that equals the projectiles array at position projectile ID. So as this thing's looping from 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, what it's going to do is it's going to assign the projectile at that position to this new variable called handle projectile. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say we want to project this new object that we've got, the projectile we want to handle, and we want to send it off in a direction. Now, within the projectile class we have a velocity object. It tells us how far it wants to go, and we can mix that with the rotation of the object to be able to work out which direction and how fast it's going. So I'm going to say handle projectile dot rotation, which is a standard movie property, and the distance we want to go. So handle projectile dot velocity. So what direction and how fast. Okay, let's see what happens. Ooh. Off they go. Let's go crazy. Now, the only problem is, and let me expand the screen to show this, they just keep on going. Nothing's stopping them. That array is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until the point where we can't handle anything anymore. It's just going to slow the whole thing down. So what we need to do is check that these projectiles are outside of the screen. If they're outside of the screen, or they've hit something, we need to get rid of them. So what we're going to do is just say, look, is this projectile outside of the screen? We haven't any enemies yet, so we can't do anything about that. So if I say if handle projectile horizontal position is greater equal to 0, And handle projectile dot horizontal position is smaller or equal to stage dot stage width. This basically says, okay, is the projectile on the screen, effectively on the horizontal position? We want to do the same thing with the vertical position. Is this projectile on the screen? So let's run that. And it gets stuck at the edge because we're telling it, you've reached the edge, we don't want you to move anymore, we don't really want to deal with you, you're going to be disappearing. Let's not manage you anymore. So what's the point in it being there? If it's on the screen, project the object. If it isn't, let's get rid of it. Now, this is the reason why I've done the array from the top to the bottom. And I'll explain why in a second. To remove an object, you basically need to go to its parent object and find it, and then tell it to be removed. You can't tell itself to remove itself. You have to tell its parent object that it's no longer needed anymore. So to do that, we're going to say handle projectile.parent, remove child, handle projectile. That basically says, I found my projectile, I'll find the movie clip that it's part of, I'll tell that movie clip that it's part of to remove myself. Okay, but that means we're going to have a gap. We're effectively going to have a reference in the array to something that doesn't exist anymore. And that's not a good thing, because next time we go and do this loop, it will just get all confused because it can't find the projectile anymore. And this is why I've done it from the end of the projectile array back to the beginning. Because if you remove something and in the middle of the array, and you decide to take away that position within the array, you can carry on counting back to 0. If you did it the other way around, you'd actually skip a position. And that would mean you would not manage one of your projectiles. It sounds complicated, but it's kind of like taking a plate out the middle of a stack of plates, but it magically hovering in the middle of the air. Something needs to be there. It's going to use gravity to fall down. If you're counting the other way, you're going to effectively find the plate that was above it has dropped down to the position you're in, and you're just going to skip to the next one, which means you won't be handling one of those plates, you won't be handling one of those projectiles. So, to do that, we need to basically do something called splicing the array. That's cutting the array in two, taking one of the elements out, and then sticking it back together again. So, projectiles, which is the name of the array, splice, projectile ID, the position that we're going to remove, and we want to remove one item, this item. Okay, so now, if we run that, as soon as that projectile reaches the edge of the screen, it disappears. It's not needed anymore, so we just remove it. And we shuffle the array around so that we actually can keep a nice, efficient array of objects, which is small and compact, and we don't have any gaps in it. So remember, count from the end to the beginning if you're going to remove anything from an array. It's the best way of doing it. Okay, so effectively now we have a game, well, at least a concept of a game, where we can move the turret, we can fire, and we can manage the projectiles. In the next tutorial, we're going to be dealing with enemies. So enemies will be appearing on the screen, they'll be trying to fire at us, and we'll be trying to fire back. Thank you for listening to this tutorial. Hope to see you in the next one.